Welcome. I'm your host, Stefano, and this is When Leaders Talk, a podcast about leadership and most importantly, about leaders. One of the things I love about this podcast is how it can reach guests from all around the world. And the guest for today, for example, is Rogelio Montekio. He's a Mexican born, but now lives in Sydney, Australia. So pretty much on the other side of the globe. And actually, one of the things we did talk a lot in this episode is diversity and inclusion and talking to people coming from different countries. And that's because Rogelio, who has 20 years of experience in leadership, having worked in sales, partnership, and business development, knows what are the three main challenges for leaders. And the first one actually is communication. The second one is how to deal with business priorities. And the third one is how to deal with high speed changes that are happening now and all the transition, all the disruptive technologies, and even other events like COVID that do impact our life in all the dimensions of it. Rogelio talks about his failures as a leader, and he's very open and honest about it. But one of the things that I think that you should really pay attention to is the way he was able to create a great team able to achieve great results. And this is through designing the alliance within the team, kind of writing down an agreement. And this agreement, Rogelio and his team, they found a way to communicate. They found a way to always state the purpose of a meeting or anything else. And they found a way to make sure that all the voices in a team are heard and everyone has the time to talk. You can do this when you are capable of creating a psychological safe environment where everyone can talk and all the others are listening for real and not judging, and they welcome whatever is said. It's not easy. It's not an easy task. And actually, one of the things we discussed with Rogelio is really how sometimes we talk about leadership and everything seems natural and easy. Oh, yeah, it will take a day or two, but it's not true. It's not true. To develop skills and to increase the effectiveness of a team, you need time. You need to spend time on it. But the reward is so great that you will do it again and again and again, and you will understand that those resources, because time and any effort is a resource that you are spending on it, will be rewarded highly. There is much more to uncover in this conversation with Rogelio, and before I leave you to the episode, let me remind you about, first of all, my website, masteryourseat.com, where you can learn more about my coaching as a leader, as a leadership coaching and the personal leadership coaching. And you can also follow me on social media, especially LinkedIn, but also on Facebook, Instagram, on Twitter and TikTok. All right, with no further ado, Rogelio Montekio. Welcome, Rogelio. I'm very happy to have you here on When Leaders Talk.
Thank you very much, Stefano. I'm very happy to be your guest today. Happy to join you.
So, Rogelio, your presence here is important. I really would like to explore with you on leadership. And, in our previous conversation, we talked a little bit and hope we'll go deeper in what's your view on leadership. And to start, of course, the first question is always, What is your definition of leadership, if you have any definition of leadership?
Yeah, I think my definition of leadership is one that you probably have heard about. It relates to the servant style of leadership, where leaders look at their role is being the ones who enable the rest of the team, is being the ones who show the way, but leading by example. And also the ones who, if you were to put this in a chart, it's probably not, they wouldn't put themselves on top of everybody else. They'd probably put themselves below everybody else as a foundation for the team success. So yeah, that's probably my most simple definition of leadership, and the one that I've tried to apply during my leadership opportunities.
Right, lead by example. Leading by example. It's easy to say. It's a matter of being, showing integrity and aligning always aligning your actions with your values and principles, and whatever you try to, in a way, enforce within your team. Well, you have to do it for yourself. So it takes a lot. And I like what you said about, well, leading not from the front but from behind, or in any other position. I mean, and I do understand that sometimes you need to move, right? It's not like always from behind. So what is the most challenging part for leadership, in leadership that you have experienced in your life, in your career?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't know if it's the most difficult part of leadership, but I think I would bring three challenges that leaders face. The first one would be about communication. That this is something that I had a lot of opportunity to learn and become aware of how important it was and how much I needed to improve in terms of communication. When I moved from Mexico to Australia and I started working with a team, my team was very diverse in terms of cultural backgrounds. There were people from very different nationalities and from many nationalities who were born and raised in different countries and had different native languages. And I realized that even when we were all trying to communicate and understand each other and agree on something, just those language barriers, those communication styles differences, even what we understood by one word or the other, sometimes came across to effective communication. So communication would be one challenge that effective leaders need to overcome. The second would be just the high speed of evolution and the fact that we were discussing just before we started recording a second ago how the world dramatically changed during COVID and how everybody needed to learn new things and be challenged with new working styles and working from home and having to go all into different types of engagement. And that's just one example of what leaders frequently face, which is the unknown, right? Where you're constantly confronted with things that you do not know, and you would have not had a chance to be prepared to know, maybe, or maybe you did, but nevertheless, you can find yourself in an area, whether it's a technical aspect or whether it's something associated with a business model that you haven't found, or just a situation you have never experienced before in terms of interpersonal relationships, whatever. So you need to deal with new things very often. And then I would also call as the last of the three challenges that leaders need to overcome regularly is the business priorities that are sometimes difficult to implement and that frequently represent a challenge for leaders to execute in a truthful, honest, compassionate way. Right? Sometimes the business is moving very quickly. The business priorities move very fast. Sometimes you don't. You feel that you don't have enough time to explain, or you, for whatever reason, are not allowed to explain to people all the details of why something is happening or something will happen. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that as a leader you shouldn't be acting in a fair and compassionate way in any ways. But just the fast pace of things sometimes come in the middle of that process. And as we were saying, not all of the times execution happens the best way possible, and not all of the times communication happens the best way possible. And not all of the times the areas that get to be prioritized are the ones that should have. But you do your best at any time, right?
Yeah, I hope so. This is how it should be. And only 3 challenges is still good. Not just here. I know those are the 3 main challenges. Yeah.
There are many, but those 3 are I think just communication, prioritization, fast speed of change, and the unknown is something that's always present.
Well, let's dig in those 3 challenges then, and I'm curious on how you deal with those. And let's start with the last one, as you mentioned, the business priorities, and that sometimes take over everything else, and probably you forget about your team and everything else. And you might create, but some companies actually are built on a culture where business is important, customers first, and everything else. And when let's say Amazon probably is the greatest example of it, right? It's so customer centered, and it's successful in this way. But on the other side, employees, they know it when they join the company, and there is a high turnover. Quite, people stay in Amazon for a couple of years and then they feel the need to change. But it's still, they join, they know it. So how do you deal with this? How do you reconcile the business priority with everything else?
Yeah, I think the first part of the answer is that if you are part of a team and organization that has a particular culture where some of these elements of the business dynamics are clearly stated about the approach to decision making, the approach to communication, the approach to a prioritization. If this is part of the culture of the company and the team, it's easier to move along these changing priorities, right? And in my experience, I cannot talk about Amazon because I haven't lived that community, but in my experience, we were a team that had a very inclusive culture. We were a team that had a strong bias towards having open conversations about our business priorities. And that made it easier for us to try to align the team towards those efforts. I just say made it easier because sometimes the business priorities change because the environment was changing, the competition brought in new challenges and things. And that meant that sometimes we faced changes in those priorities, probably in a way or time that we didn't expect. But I believe that specifically, I'm talking about the organization that I was directly involved with and the team that reported to me and the people that I reported to. We had an openness to try to discuss and help people explain and bring the reason why we were eventually changing direction and changing communication or making changes on whatever part of our program. And that helped. That helped a lot, right? It was still something that was challenging to manage, and sometimes we changed frequently, and sometimes the change was not always perfectly clear, and sometimes we changed in a direction and we learned that we had moved in the wrong direction, then we kind of correct. But I think the culture would allowed us to be immersed in this shared protocol that allowed us to try to help everybody understand and bring together in the direction that we're moving forward.
Right, and you talk about change. So let's linger here a little bit because, as we discussed earlier, changes are happening so fast, and the revolutions that took hundreds of years first now happen on a time span of probably a few years. AI probably is the last disruptive technology in the business, and before that was the internet, and before that was something else, and then but it is like the moment, since the new revolution began and another one begins, it's getting shorter, shorter, and shorter. And teams, organization, companies, even at a personal level, actually, we need to get ready for those changes. Even if we don't know what kind of, we don't know what's next. Okay, AI is here now. What's next? Quantum, maybe. We don't know, right? So how do you deal with it when you are the leader of a team? When you have a company or a task in your company or in your team, how do you make sure that the people working in your team can survive the changes without being stressed or overwhelmed?
Well, I would like to think that that I was able to do what you just described, but in all truthfulness, if you ask somebody who was part of my team, they would probably say that, oh no, we were always stressed, or it was hard to understand. So I can tell you what I tried to do. Maybe you can talk or have a conversation similar to this with some other person from my team, and they would probably say, "Oh, Rogelio did a lousy job at that, or did a good job at that." But I think there were two aspects of it that at least I tried to do during my work leading a team in that changing environment. The first one was having the responsibility of understanding and learning the changes that were happening, and being dedicated enough to spend the time to understand what was changing, whether it was a change in the product, the way it worked, a change in our processes, how we needed to do something, how we collaborated internally, a change in the commercial terms of our program, which meant that we needed to bring communication to our external partners. The responsibility to learn and understand what was changing, so that I was able to articulate and to properly represent this to the rest of the team and the rest of the people I needed to lead. That was part of it, clearly. And so it was always, there was always an opportunity and a need to continue to be on top of changes, new commercial terms, new objectives, new processes, new product features and functionality, new competition elements. So there was always a need to understand and to research and to study. And I think that was very important part of my role as a leader. And then the second, I come back to the communication element. Articulating the same messages to different people actually requires you to communicate differently with each of them. And let me give you an example. There was people in my team that reported to me that, because of the way they were wired in their language communication, they used very few words. They actually preferred very clear, crisp messages, very concrete, very concise, very short. And there were other team members that, because of the same reasons, their preference was exactly the opposite. They preferred to be told the same message in a story, and taking them by the hand and kind of letting them hear things in some sort of a logical explanation. And in order for me to be able to effectively communicate the same message to different people, I needed to, as much as I could, understand what was their communication preference, and then try to mirror that for increasing chances of success. So learning and adjusting the communication style, I think that was part of the approach to solving that challenge.
Yeah, and I can imagine, because of course, coming, you work in a company, you work in Google, where there are people coming from all around the world, literally. So you have to deal with different cultures, different. It's not just the language. Language, at the end of the day, you find a common language, normally English, but you need to find an effective way of communicating. And that's not easy. I mean, I've been working in international environments, and actually, you know, some is sensitive on some aspect. As you say, someone prefer like bottom lining, very short, direct. Others, you need to create a bigger narrative, a longer narrative to explain and involve. What is and then basically what we showed now that you talk is how those three challenges are all interconnected. It's not just communication. It's not just changes. It's not just business priority. Everything, you know, moves and they are intertwined and making the job of a leader more interesting. I don't want to say more complicated or complex, more interesting, right? But not always things go as you plan, I guess. And
Yeah.
we have to face failures. You know, a challenge, it means that the outcome could be good or not. What is the greatest failure, if you want to tell us, of course, that you have dealt with, or a failure?
Yeah, I'll tell you a failure. There's two angles to it, and I know some people I particularly dislike when you ask someone to share a failure and then they kind of come up and spin it and they'll tell you something that is a wait a second,
Successful.
Exactly. So now I'm going to describe first a failure as something that didn't happen the way you wanted or expected, right? So it didn't go the way you wanted. It doesn't mean that it might have not been a catastrophic outcome. It might have not been something, but just let's say what was something that didn't happen. And in the context of what we were describing, there was, I'll share with you two examples. One of them is even a little bit funny, I would say, and the other one is not as funny but equally important. The first one is when I just shortly after I moved to Australia, and we were working with a portfolio of partners that were not very operationally effective. We had one particular partner that stopped paying their bills. So what happens when a partner stops paying the bills in the case of a product like Google Ads, then you get to be suspended, which means that because the partner gets a suspension, the accounts that are managed, the customer accounts that are managed by that partner are suspended, right? So you suspend the partner, but you're suspending customers from the activity that they have on their advertising campaigns. And this particular partner had a fairly large number of accounts. And I remember that I was trying to solve that problem, which meant I was trying to get the partner to pay, or at least show goodwill towards the process or the problem. And on the other side, I was also dealing with the collections team at Google, whose responsibility was to recover the debt that was in arrears, right? And interestingly, my partner was in one of the countries in the region, Asia Pacific, and the collections team was based in another country in the region, where first of all there was a big time zone difference. So by the time one of them was arriving to the office, the other one was about to leave. So there was only about an hour for the two individuals to be working during the regular work hours. And then I remember being in a conference like this, trying to come up to an agreement. And I couldn't understand anything that both of them were saying. Like I was just not used to the accent of the people that I was listening to. Yeah. And I couldn't understand what one was telling the other, and I couldn't understand the reply of the other person. I was thinking, how am I going to actually be able to influence and solve this if I basically don't understand anything that's been said here? So needless to say, that situation was like that for a few days, which damaged a number of clients, and then the clients, some of them might have paid, some of them not. I'm sorry for the ones that were on time on their own payments because they were being suspended as a result of the partner not paying. And it actually stayed like that for over a week, which was definitely bad, right?
Yeah.
It fine. So it definitely, and I had a huge, very accelerated learning process there, because the first call was a tragedy. Like the first call, I couldn't understand anything, and because of the time zone difference, I only had another chance to get people to talk to each other until the following day at the same time, right? And then for the next day, I was ready, and I was ready to prepare, and I shared written statements with both of us. So this time, at least, I knew that we were discussing the same topics or opinions on everything, and we got a little bit of progress, but we were short on time, and we couldn't get a commitment from the partner to pay, or the collections team to reestablish the service. So it didn't solve on the following day. It went on for a few days, and it was definitely a learning process, very painful for the customers especially. So that was one case where it didn't went the way we wanted. Success would have been to get the partner to make a commitment to payment, the service established, and the customer's not suffering, right? It didn't happen like that. But as we were saying, that this is the type of things that you run into. And then another example that actually is a bit closer to my heart in terms of how important it was about one particular situation that we're facing with one client, that I made an opinion. I made a very direct, abrupt opinion to a person in my team who I thought, I never thought that the way I was communicating about that topic was going to actually make an impact on her, right? And it was only 2 or 3 days later that she actually had the courage to come back to me and said that she was shocked by how hard, or how, let's say, that how bold or hard or decisive my opinion about a problem had been, right? And then I became aware, and we were talking about the self-awareness element. I became aware of how I was assuming that the other person would understand my intention, or understand my communication style in a way that I thought was correct, and how she was impacted in a very different way, right? And it actually made a big impact on her, and I really appreciated, and I really thank her for letting me know, because had she not come to me to tell me that she was shocked about how I had expressed myself in that moment, I would have never thought it was okay. It was not okay. I would have never learned that it was not okay, because I thought it was okay in the context of our relationship and everything. So I just became very, very, very aware of how even inadvertently you could affect other people even without the intention, right? So I became much more, I would say, careful about making those type of bold statements that sometimes could have been perceived as aggressive or very harsh to other people in the team. Yeah.
And you touch upon something that is very important when you talk about feedbacks, right? Because this lady came to you and gave you a feedback, and the most important part is always to listen to the feedback and accept it, being humble and open mind, and take it in, and just, and then through the feedback, try to revisit what happened and see, as you did, what you can do to be more careful, as you just said. And I like that. I really appreciate that. This is something that it's some leaders, they don't like people, and they tell them that no, this is wrong, or I have not appreciated this. They're just kind of, oh well, I'm never wrong.
You know, Stephen, what happened in that particular case is that when we were having that spontaneous conversation, I all of a sudden realized that I was communicating with her as my peer, even as my friend. And she was receiving my communication as a communication coming to her from her leader. And that was a complete disalignment on what was going on, right? And when she brought that feedback to me, and I realized how important my communication style as a leader and how much impact it could have, right? It made me learn. It made me in a painful way. I would get to tell you in a way that I was not expecting how important that was, right? So I was used to being very close to my team. I was used to being very, familiar, you could say. But then I realized that even if you have a very good relationship, you are still the leader, and what you say and the way you say it matters, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The way you say it and how you say it. Okay, I want to go back to what you said earlier. We discussed a little bit how you have led people coming from these different countries, and I'm very intrigued by this culture of inclusion that you as a leader, as a servant leader, as you say at the beginning of this interview, you have to have, right, to integrate all those people. And I wonder if you can share with us, how do you make sure that all the voices in a team are heard? How do you make sure that inclusion is a value in the team and that everyone is safe?
Yes. Yeah. Well, first of all, I got to give credit to, in general, Google's culture of inclusion. And I got to be, again, I got to give credit to my leaders who always were supported and fostered. I don't have to say it, but I'm saying it because it was true. I was very lucky to be part of a team where our leaders really, really put an effort to make sure that we had a culture of inclusion and appreciation of diversity. But how we made sure, I'll tell you three things that we actually did, very specific. The first one is we learned, just as a result of team conversations about how can we do this better. The first thing that we did is that we established a communication protocol in very practical. We said, okay, if what you need is not urgent, it's okay to send an email and expect a response in whatever, 2-3 days, maybe a little bit more, right? If what you are needing, or the information you're needing, is time sensitive, just go into the chat, the internal chat, and ping the person and ask what you need. And not because this is more important or because it's less important, you will ping people when it's time sensitive, right? You're interrupting people because it's time sensitive. And then something very funny, we actually learned that the team didn't like when you were being very, didn't like the courtesy and the small talk on the chat. Like they said, oh, I hate it when someone tells, hey, how are you? Hey, are you there? Are you there? Yes, I'm here and I'm in the middle of something. So just ask me what you want, right? So we actually agreed that said, look, what we actually think is okay in the chat is forget the small talk, just ask the question, right? Do you know what's the situation with this contract? Is this contract ready? Yes or no? Do you understand who can help me solve this problem? Yes or no? Do you have the phone number of this person because I need to contact this person right away? Yes or no? So we agreed on the communication protocol on how to communicate for things that were important but not urgent, for things that were urgent but maybe not important. Also, we agreed that, hey, look, and if you actually need something, just move your body, walk to my desk if we're in the office and ask me the question, or call my phone. I'm actually going to call you if I need, because if I call you, it doesn't mean that it's something that is very important or not. It just the next level of time sensitiveness is that if you didn't saw my ping, I'm calling you because I really need to know this now. It doesn't mean that the world is ending. It's just, and if you're not available, it's okay to say, I'm in the middle of something, I'll call you back, right? So we agreed on this communication protocol. And then another thing that the next iteration was we also agreed on being explicit about the purpose of our discussions. This was something that was, somebody learned about this and was actually very, a great suggestion for our team collaboration to say, hey, are we sharing information? Are we welcoming a discussion? Are we having a discussion? Or are we making a decision? Right? Because depending on what we're doing, let's just approach that in that communication. If we're sharing information, we'll just be very quickly, we'll do this, we'll pretty much, it's going to be one-way communication share. If we're having a discussion, it's okay to explore, it's okay to open lines of thinking, it's okay to have controversial points of view, it's okay to argue or question, because we're having a discussion. But if we need to make a decision, then we're also kind of closing in and making a decision. So this was very important because, and it was not only me, it was not Rogelio was the one who said, we are making a decision today, or we are exploring what we're doing. It was the rest, everybody in the team who was bringing topics to the team meetings, the agenda, who were saying, this is information sharing, this is a discussion, I expect you to participate, or this is a decision we're making and we're moving forward together, right? So these type of things really helped us communicate and articulate the things, the way we effectively kind of align for what we were needing to do. And when it was a discussion, this is the last part of the answer, even the video conferencing tools were very good because they would allow us to say how much of the time I've been speaking versus how much of the time I've been listening, and just making sure that, hey, raise your hand, let other people talk. And then you would do a little bit of facilitating there just to make sure that everybody had a chance, right? In small team settings, you expect everybody to participate if there's a team discussion, right? If there's a team discussion, you, at least in the Google culture, you expect people who are in the room to be part of the discussion. You don't, and that also helps, because even if there are different personality styles and everything, even the most introvert and shy, if they're in a small team setting and that's a discussion going on, they know that they're not only welcome, there's an expectation that they will eventually share their point of view at a certain point, right? So knowing that that's the way it goes, it actually helped. And then just counting with the team, understanding all those kind of rules, protocols, communication practices helped a lot.
You just described what, as a coach, I do when I work with teams. You know, basically the first step is always to make an agreement. And it's all about designing the alliance between team members. Is how we're going to talk, right? And every team chooses their own way. This way that you describe, you know, what is the kind of channels of communication, depending on the urgency, emergency, or everything else, the purpose, stating the purpose of the communication every time, and allowing that everyone has time to talk is great. I really appreciate this. And it's hard. I think it's very hard to create psychological safety in a team, you know, when everyone really feels safe to talk without judgment from anyone else.
Yes, that is absolutely true. That is the other element that's important for that participation, right? People need to know that they can participate and be part of that discussion, whether their opinion is a supportive one, is a conflictive one, it's whatever it is, right? That's going to enrich. That is, I think that is a team dynamic, right? It's initiated by the leader. You as a leader need to, again, set the tone, but the team, when you get a team to really exercise that, then it's just a cycle that reinforces, right? So then all of a sudden, everybody knows that the team is like that. And even if there's one day when someone had a bad day or a bad morning and kind of probably just losing their patience with someone else or something, regularly the team will follow this way of behaving as a team that really encourages that. So yeah, good teams that build that sense of trust will reinforce that and will be very protective. Actually, when something goes that against that line, everybody will sense that and will notice and will be very, very quick to point that something was not probably the right behavior, was not probably the yeah. The
And
last
that's
part.
the. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. The last part of it and where everything lands in that sense, Stefano, is what I remember myself constantly thinking, telling myself, and acting like this with the team to assume good intentions when there was a miscommunication. Don't assume that there was harm intended. Don't assume that there was any agenda. Just assume that there was a just honest mistake, miscommunication. Assume good intentions. If you, and I remember I was constantly reminding myself about every time that something was not moving the way it wanted, just having the right reaction or something, I was constantly reminding myself, assume good intentions. Don't assume that someone did this because of whatever other reason, because then you're going to be angry, you're going to be irritated, you'll probably react. But if you assume good intentions, what you will ask first is that, why did you do that? Or why did you say that? Or what did you mean with that comment? Or help me understand what was going on. And yeah, fortunately, most of the time there was good intentions and therefore it was easy to rectify, right?
Most of the times. And let me play on this nuance because most of the times means sometimes it was not an honest mistake, right? It was a clear intention of damaging her. How do you deal with that? How do you spot that behavior, and how do you deal with that?
Again, I hope that if you ask this question to someone who was part of my team, the teams I lead, hopefully they will say that what I'm going to tell you is what happened, right? But I'm going to tell you what I think I always try to do is, look, I think people, especially in we're very lucky in particular in Google to have the most talented professionals, like people who's well prepared, people who has amazing experience, incredibly talented, incredibly smart, and therefore, and also everybody was an adult, right? There was no kids around. We were not, everybody was professional in whatever they were doing. So when something was not okay, I think people deserves to know that that is not okay and why is okay and what's the consequence and what are first of all, what are the corrective actions? And if that doesn't happen, what's the consequence? Like, because it's a personal choice. If I ask, going back to connecting with the previous conversation, I say, hey, why did you say that? I mean, what were you trying to accomplish with that comment, which didn't sound right? And then I hear, oh, yeah, I did this because I didn't like this, and I was very angry with this, and this is my reaction, and I didn't want to say, okay, well, this is not okay. That was not okay. Depending on the seriousness, then things would happen. But I think it all starts by telling if it's actually something that is not okay, then it is not okay. And then people deserves you as a leader, as a manager. In that moment, you kind of change hats and then you become a manager and say, hey, it is also my job as a manager to tell you that this is not okay. And this is how it goes, right? And people appreciates that because that also brings clarity. And not everybody, as we were saying, feedback is not always immediately welcome, and it's sometimes received in a defensive way or whatever. But at least I always thought, even at the expense of sometimes getting you in more conflict, that people deserves to know when something is not okay. And it's not a nice thing from managers to just pass along things that are not okay to let someone else deal with it, right? It's not that I was kind of volunteering to fix problems and be a kind of, the person who's taking that role all of a sudden. But if something happened within my team, within my business responsibility, then at that moment, then those are the short periods of time when it's your job to be a manager. Right?
Yeah, and that's the hard part when you have to deal with mistakes and talk to people. But as you say, being honest and clear and direct pays off. You don't need to be upset. You don't need to say things in an upset way, because, as you say, especially when you work with professionals, with adults, they know it. They're already thinking about the mistake. They're already regretting the mistake. They're like, oh my gosh, what did I do?
And I recognize it's not easy. It's not easy for people to listen when they're being called out on something was wrong. And it's also sometimes you, as a manager, you're also emotionally affected. Something that the other person has done that was not okay could have had an impact on your team, on your team's results, on your reputation. There's a lot that can happen. So sometimes, in other words, it's easier said than done. Like keeping your cool.
Like everything. Yeah, like everything. Even when we talk about leadership, when I talk about leadership and I give advices and I comment something, my thought is, oh, so easy to write this. But at the end of the day, when you are under pressure, stress, urgency, people that have expectations and they have problems, and then someone is probably yelling at you or whatever, well, that's when the real leader comes out, when he's able. But there are few, and then it's very, very difficult. And it needs practice, because I like to say that you don't need to be born as a leader. But you can be a leader. You can learn how to be a leader.
Yeah, definitely experience is something that helps a lot, right? And I can tell you that many times I probably didn't react the best way possible, but that doesn't mean that I was not trying at that, or maybe I found myself often coming back and apologizing because of maybe not having the right reaction. But the right thing to do, and what I always tried to do, even if I was not really executing at excellence, was to be compassionate, be honest, be effective, in the sense that just dealing with the problem, not with the person, dealing with whatever was what needed to be done, is the best way to go, right? And and again, easier said than done. And I know that there must have been many times when I didn't actually do as I'm saying, but I can tell you that there were also, I think, enough times where I was able to be a leader and be a manager in the right balance as it's needed. And I really enjoy that, because one thing that I truly believe is that, and something that I truly enjoy, is that both in sports and in business, great teams accomplish amazing things together. Right? Great teams accomplish amazing things together, and that's what as a team leader, as a leader, that's something that I've always tried to go for, is to set a big goal and get a team that accomplishes amazing things together, and that's really, really rewarding.
Yeah, it is. It is rewarding. And you say something that it made me think about my past. It's not easy to apologize. It's not easy to, but every time you do, the people look at you and say, oh, yes, of course. Yes. And they welcome your vulnerabilities, and they welcome your honesty, and they welcome your self-critic and self-compassion. You, as a leader, made a mistake, and apologizing if someone has been involved in this mistake is such a powerful and yet difficult tool, because you go there and say, I am not perfect, I'm human, I made a mistake, and I'm sorry about that. It's so
it's very hard to do, but on the other side, your team is always watching you, and they actually realize all the mistakes that you make all of the time.
They do.
They are more aware of all the mistakes that you make than yourself, right? So they actually observe you, they see you, and they know you better than you know yourself in that fashion. So when you become aware of something, and then, as you say, you have the courage to come and apologize for something that you should apologize.
And one of the things I've hated in my career, when something happened and leaders, they refuse to understand the mistake was theirs, and actually they start playing the blame game, trying to put the shame on someone else and find the victim of this action, or because you didn't tell me that, or you forget. Oh my gosh, it's so terrible, so disheartening, and you lose the motivation and everything.
And we all know when that happens. I mean, the whether it's said or not, but the reputation of the leader, the image of that person to the people who follow them, it just gets affected, right? It gets
All right, Rogelio. Time is passing is faster than I thought, apparently, and we have space for a last question. That is, let's say that someone comes to you and say, Rogelio, I want to be a good leader. I want to be actually a great leader. Can you give me a suggestion? Can you give me what to do, how to do it? What is the suggestion you would give to this person?
In line with what we've been discussing, Stefano, my suggestion would be to spend the time needed to learn what needs to be communicated to the people who follows you, and then try your best to communicate that effectively. It's those two parts. First, prepare yourself, study, research, learn, be ready to understand what needs to be communicated, and then do your best to try to communicate that in the most effective way. And that means trying to understand who's your audience. If you're talking to a small team or you're talking to a large group of people, how did you effectively communicate that? What's the communication channels? What's the communication style? And really do not underestimate the importance of those two parts, which is just knowing exactly what needs to be communicated, and then really finding the best way to do that, right? As a matter of fact, this is so important, Stefan. I'm just going to go back, and sorry that I'm taking a little bit longer, but some of the best meetings that we had with my team in preparation with a meeting with an external partner, we actually did discuss those two things. We were going to be meeting with a partner. We were going to have the privilege of their attention for an hour or so. What do we need to tell them? What do we need to communicate? And then how do we communicate that? And we spent a fair amount of time as a team discussing those two elements. And that's how we prepared for those meetings.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much for having shared with us your experience, and your ideas and whatever you have built as a leader, as beliefs of a leader, as skills and challenges. It's been a great discussion, and once again, thank you for having been with us, Rogelio.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Stefan. I enjoyed our conversation.